On today's Murder, She Wrote podcast, we find ourselves in Viva Las Vegas. Viva, Viva Las Vegas! And there's murder afoot. Hello guys, and welcome to the Murder, She Wrote podcast, where I watch every single episode of the hit 80s/90s show Murder, She Wrote, starring 3-time Academy Award nominee and 5-time Tony Award winner, Miss Angela Lansbury. Today we're going to be talking about Season 1, Episode 11, Death Casts a Spell. Air date December 30th, 1984. Woo! I am so sorry that I did not post a Halloween episode. Unfortunately, there's not a Halloween episode in Season 1, and I don't think there's going to be a Thanksgiving episode or a Christmas episode, because this is the last episode that airs in 1984. And for those of you wondering, your host, me, DJ, was not born yet when this episode aired. So, I was not born until December of 1989. So, there you go. So this episode's very interesting. We find ourselves in Las Vegas, and we get introduced to a really great hypnotist. Now, I can't pronounce his name, and I can honestly say that a lot of people in the episode have trouble pronouncing his name, so I'm not going to bore you by trying to pronounce his name. And I know that we're in Las Vegas because of the weird stock footage they use at the beginning of this episode that looks like footage they shot like years and years ago. Sorry, computer made a sound. Can't help it. Anyway, so the great hypnotist is on stage at the start of the episode at this hotel, and that's going to be in your visual aid when you're listening to this episode. There's going to be a picture of people on a stage, just give me a second here. Technical difficulties. Alright. In your visual aid, you're going to see a group of people standing on a stage. The blonde woman in the middle of your screen, because I thought this was the perfect visual aid for this episode. He basically snaps his fingers and says that they will become their favorite animal. So the woman in the blue dress in the middle of the screen is pretending to be a chicken. The one guy in the corner is pretending to be a monkey, and the other two are pretending to be dogs. The woman, sorry, again, my computer made another sound. I can't help it. The woman in the flower print dress that is staring blankly ahead on the left side of your screen will pretend to be an elephant. And it is hilarious. Then he snaps his fingers again and he says they will now be totally naked, and the woman in the blue dress and your visual aid is totally and completely fine with this. You know, she's like, oh, well, whatever, and everyone else runs off stage in embarrassment. He then has them come back on stage and says that once he snaps his fingers one more time, twice, they will be back to normal and not remember anything. During his show, we get introduced to Bud Michaels, played by Murray Hamilton, famous for being the mayor in the Jaws movies. More on him a little bit later. He's drunk and says that the great hypnotist is nothing but a fraud. He's sitting in the bar with his assistant, Andy. Mrs. Fletcher then comes after this display, and we get introduced to Joan, who is sort of like an assistant at Mrs. Fletcher's publishing firm. And also, before I get any further, I want to congratulate these wonderful extras in that scene that I just talked about. They are really, really good. Anyway, Jessica is lured to Las Vegas under false pretenses. She's told that her publisher has an idea for a new book, but it's actually Joan about the hypnotist. Men fear him. Women adore him. The book practically writes itself, but Miss Fletcher unfortunately is not interested in it and doesn't want to write it. Then Bud Michaels gets up and stumbles over to the great hypnotist, who is sitting at a table with two women, and he challenges him to basically tell the press everything there is to know about him, but says that he's too shy to do so. So the great hypnotist says that he will do it, and he invites any and all reporters who will come in for this, but on his terms. And everything he reveals, they won't remember a thing. But Mr. Michaels backs out at the last possible second and tells Andy to fill in for him. Curiosity has been aroused in Mrs. Fletcher and Joan, and they decide to join in on the session too. Mrs. Fletcher stays in the lobby waiting for Joan to tell her where they're supposed to go, when a woman wearing what I can only describe looking like a carpet dress stops Mrs. Fletcher and says, "Oh, Nurse Beasley Blanche or something. It's so great. I never miss an episode of your show." And Mrs. Fletcher tries to tell her, "Oh, that's really lovely, but I'm not who you think I am." And the woman keeps going on and on and on, kind of like normal fans do to celebrities, I'm sure. And then Mrs. Fletcher tries to tell her that she's not on television, that she writes books. Then she notices in the woman's bag she has one of her books, and she picks it up and she says, "I wrote this. I'm J.B. Fletcher. See, this is my picture on this book." And the woman says, "No, you're not," and walks away angry. During this, Mrs. Fletcher sees Andy across the way getting on an elevator, and she tries to call him, but he appears to not hear her. Joan then finally figures out where they're supposed to go, but first we get introduced to the weirdest character in the episode, who does not turn out to be the killer. We get introduced to Mr. Joe Keegan and his wife Regina Keegan. According to this scene was really weird. The weirdest thing of this whole episode, despite its premise. Sorry, chair's making a noise. Anyway, Regina tells Joe, "I couldn't help it, Joe. I was completely under his spell." And then, out of nowhere, this guy literally grabs her throat and says, "My God, Regina, You can't make somebody do something against their will unless they wanted to do it in the first place. And she says sorry, and she looks at him with these sad eyes, and suddenly he goes from almost killing her, to kissing her and saying that he'll take care of that old hypnotist. He then goes down and catches the hypnotist before he's going upstairs and tells him that he doesn't want him to play at his hotel anymore. But the hypnotist says they have a contract and he will play there for as long as the contract is valid. Mr. Keegan tries to go after him, but one of the waiters holds him back and he knocks down a bunch of silverware in a tray. Meanwhile, Joan figures out where they're supposed to go, but when they get up there, it's too late. A man is standing outside the door and says that no one can go in now since he started the session. Everyone is in there and accounted for. Suddenly, they hear glass break, and they have no idea what's going on. At that moment, Mr. Joe comes into the elevator and wonders what's going on. He has the key. He unlocks the door. They find the hypnotist dead on the floor and all the witnesses in a trance, unable to say a word. And there are 7 people in that room, and not one of them can speak. Luckily for them, Joan was recording the hypnotist session earlier in the episode and is able to play back the last part when he snaps his fingers twice to where they won't remember a thing. And they wake up and they don't remember a thing. Mrs. Fletcher points out to the detective, who does not play that big of a significant role in this one, that the hole does not seem big enough for anyone to reach their hand through to unlock the door. It also appears as if the glass is broke from inside the room. But who could possibly get up on the balcony, get into the room, and kill this guy? Mrs. Fletcher was originally going to go back to Cabot Cove, but her curiosity has gotten her. How can a man be murdered, locked in a room with 7 people, and not one of them can tell you what happened while they were in that room? And I, as a viewer, and I'm sure everybody else, was very intrigued by this episode. So Mrs. Fletcher decides to go talk to Mr. Bud Michaels, who she realizes through talking to Andy, his assistant, that he was faking his drunkenness the night before, and that he only did it to get the hypnotist to basically do the session so that he can get some dirt on him, because apparently he caused his magazine to go belly up a couple times due to his hypnotist skills, I guess. And he tells Andy to start asking questions and solve the crime so that Andy can have a story. Joan begins to do some investigating on her own and finds out that the woman working for the hypnotist, Sherry Diamond, used to be a stripper and a trapeze artist. She decides to ask her to reenact the murder, but Miss Diamond says that she was only a stripper and was not a trapeze artist, that she just sort of sat in a net and then took her clothes off, which doesn't make her a trapeze artist, and she freaks out and refuses to do it. Joan then believes that she is completely and utterly the murderer. Mrs. Fletcher then decides to go see Dr. Yammerd, who socializes also in hypnosis, and she does not believe that hypnosis actually exists, but he's able to hypnotize her without her realizing it, and she does various voices that he records her when he has hypnotized her, and it's so funny. And I just remembered that before Mrs. Fletcher goes to talk to Bud Michaels, after seeing the doctor, she goes and finds Andy in the lobby of the hotel, putting quarters in a slot machine that talks back and says, "Please try again." Um, Andy basically tells her that Mr. Michaels can hold his liquor, and it seems strange that he was drunk the previous night before. He also says the police questioned him over and over again, but he can't remember anything. He thought of confessing just to get them to shut up. Miss Fletcher then goes to see the detective. He's in some sort of office where they're making some sort of repairs. I'm not entirely sure what's going on in the scene. But she basically butters the detective up to basically let her in on the case because she's as baffled as he is and she wants to help him solve it. He accuses her of wanting to write a book about it, but she claims there is no book. And they begin doing conspiracy theories about the crime, saying that Mr. Kagan, Joe, could be the killer, but Mrs. Fletcher says, how could he have gotten off the elevator mere seconds after the glass broke, making him a suspect and a suspicious character, but not necessarily our killer. Mr. Michaels then tells Andy that he doesn't want him to talk to Mrs. Fletcher anymore, and that if anyone's going to solve the murder, it's going to be him, because maybe his magazine will finally get back up and running with this story, and everyone will enjoy it. Mrs. Fletcher then goes to see Sherry Diamond, who's working out in the hotel gym. As Mrs. Fletcher sits in the gym, Sherry tells her that she works out for fun now. She used to work for her job, but now it's just a hobby. Mrs. Fletcher decides to ask her what the history is between the hypnotist and Mr. Michaels. And Sherry tells her this. It turns out that Mr. Michaels decided to go after the hypnotist, proving that his hypnosis is based on blackmail and lies. But the hypnotist was more smart than he was. He told him a bunch of lies and he printed it. And then he sued him for liability, which caused him to be fired at his newspaper job, and he didn't work for a year. Now he has a magazine that's barely staying afloat, and he hates the hypnotist with a burning passion. Mrs. Fletcher then questions her, wondering, if the hypnotist is so bad, why did she continue to work for him? She said a job is a job and it beats what she used to do. When he caught her act in Vegas, Mrs. Fletcher says, well, what was your act? And she says, I was a stripper. Yep, I took it all off for everyone while on the high-flying trapeze. Interesting, huh? Joan goes to make a call on the payphone when she overhears Andy Townsend investigating Miss Sherry Diamond, and he himself finds out that she used to be a stripper with a trapeze act. Then Mr. Kagan finds out that his hotel business is not doing so well. A lot of people have canceled their reservations because of the murder, and a lot of guests have checked out. Then after that, a mysterious man knocks on the door of Mrs. Kagan's room in the hotel, and he says now that he's dead, we have to discuss the matter of payments, but we have no idea who this man is. Then Mrs. Fletcher goes to see Mr. Michaels. I'm sorry guys, it's hard to remember everything that happens. She confronts Mr. Michaels about his faking his drinking and explains that he didn't want to go and suit down to his level. She then suggests that they help solve the crime together since he's wanting to have a big story so his magazine and him as a whole will be a success. They're lounging by a pool that, in my opinion, really needs to be cleaned. They then wonder how someone could have gotten into a room, and then they see someone on a rope ladder lowering down on the balconies of the hotel. Mrs. Fletcher then goes up on the roof to find what's going on, and it turns out that Joan has orchestrated this whole thing. She even invited Sherry Diamond along and asks her to climb down on the balcony to see if anyone can, even though we just saw a man doing it. When she looks over the edge and sees how high up they are, Sherry Diamond refuses to do this and says she was only on a swing, meaning she wasn't actually a trapeze artist. When she walks away, scared, Joan assumes she's the murderer. Joan thinks that Sherry Diamond basically lowered herself down to the balcony and killed him because she was a former trapeze artist. Mrs. Fletcher points out that the only motive that Sherry Diamond didn't have a motive to kill the hypnotist. Why? Because the only thing she would gain was unemployment. And there's no way that she could have come up with that contraption to be able to do that in the time between the glass breaking and his death. There's no way that it could have happened. And the detective and Joan realize again they've hit a brick wall and have no idea who our killer could be. As they come down the elevator after that, Mrs. Fletcher and the lieutenant run into Joe, who owns the hotel. He demands to know what's going on his roof, and claims the detective didn't ask his permission. The detective says he doesn't have to ask his permission. And Joe says, well, he wishes that they wouldn't do that. Mrs. Fletcher confronts him about his fight with the hypnotist the night before and accuses him of being the murderer. He basically says he doesn't have to kill him because he found a clause in his contract, a moral clause, and he was going to send him out on his ear without a red cent so that he wouldn't have to play at the hotel anymore. And he also says he had nothing to do with his death and neither did his wife. They made up last night. So he's off our list, even though he is a strange and weird character. Joan and Mrs. Fletcher are outside, and behind them, for some reason, there are a bunch of men, shirtless, playing golf, as they discuss the crime. If it wasn't Mr. Kagan, if it wasn't Sherry Diamond, then who could it have been? Mrs. Fletcher said that's just the thing. The people who had motives couldn't get in. And the people who had no motives at all were the ones that were inside. She says it's completely baffling. Joan then goes off to make a call because she has a friend who worked with Zach Bernard, so hopefully she can find some information. Mrs. Fletcher then sees Mrs. Kagan, aka Regina, coming out of the hotel dressed in a really ugly purple hat and a weird ugly shirt, looking as suspicious as anyone could possibly be. Joan gets in her car and decides to drive away. Mrs. Fletcher decides she needs to follow her to see what she's doing. Lucky for her, there is a guy on a motorcycle right there, and she asks him if he can help her find a taxi. When he says one will be along in a minute, she says that'll be too late. I want to follow that green car. But maybe it's too late. He says, no, like in the movies, hop on. And she does. And they follow Regina down the road to a black car where she hands the mysterious man we met earlier money. But why did she do that? The man turns out to be Zach Bernard. And he is blackmailing Regina because Regina had a brief affair with the hypnotist, as hinted at during that weird scene I told you about earlier between Joe and her when she said she was completely under the hypnotist's spell and she didn't mean to be. When she tried to stop seeing the hypnotist, he refused. So Regina contacted Zach and offered to pay him a bunch of money to kill the hypnotist. She then went to go discuss the details about the killing, and he didn't mention it again. Then, what she didn't know is he recorded the conversation, and he is blackmailing her since she offered him money to kill the hypnotist. But it's been proven that Zach Bernard is not our killer. Zach was also one of the witnesses that was in the room that was hypnotized. They claim that he might have let someone in before the hypnotist got there, and all points point to Sherry Diamond. They caught Zach at the state line, and he claimed that Sherry was in love with the hypnotist. and that she stood to gain the most from his murder, even though the motive is not abundantly clear. So as Mrs. Fletcher, the detective, lieutenant, and Joan are all in the room, basically Mrs. Fletcher doesn't believe that Sherry Diamond is the murderer. It doesn't make sense, and it's impossible. Joan even goes, "What a great concept! Jealous ex-trapeze artist kills famous hypnotist." But the detective is so confused. He says, "We have 6 witnesses, 6 intelligent journalists at the top of their field, and none of them can tell us a darn thing. They ought to be deaf, dumb, and blind." And then Miss Fletcher gets it. She knows exactly who the murderer is. When the detective says they ought to be deaf, dumb, and blind, Mrs. Fletcher suddenly gets it. And Joan and the detective work to plant some false leads for the people. Joan goes at the bar and talks to Mr. Michaels and tells him all about the theory that Mrs. Fletcher and the lieutenant have. Then the lieutenant goes to Andy and asks for his help to try to get him to remember what happened on the night of the murder. The detective tells Andy that they've gotten a hypnotist to put him under so that they can take off the memory lock. And maybe they'll find out who the murderer is, because they think they already know, but they're not sure. Andy asked, "Well, who did it?" He said, "I can't tell you that, but just come to the room. We got a hypnotist, and maybe we can help you." The hypnotist puts him into a trance, and it's not the doctor from earlier that hypnotized Miss Fletcher. It's someone totally different. He puts him under, and he tells him that he will remember everything that happened in the room. Andy says that he remembers seeing the hypnotist doing his act, and in his recollection, Sherry Diamond comes through the open door, stabs the hypnotist in the back, then grabs a fireplace poker and breaks the glass, and then disappears down the balcony. And then he's brought out of the trance. When the hypnotist snaps his fingers, Andy comes out of it and says that he remembers that Sherry Diamond is the one that killed the hypnotist. But Mrs. Fletcher says, "Andy, that's simply not true. That's not the way it happened." Mrs. Fletcher did some checking, and she also had Joan plant the story that Sherry Diamond was the murderer, knowing that Mr. Michaels would tell Andy about it. She did some checking and found out that Sherry had fallen from a fall at a very high place, and she's now been seeking therapy because she now has a fear of heights. So, Sherry can't possibly be the murderer. So, as it turns out, Andy says that that's the way that it happened, and Mrs. Fletcher said, he goes, "I was in a trance." And Mrs. Fletcher basically says, "Let me introduce our hypnotist, Jake, the blackjack dealer. He knows nothing about hypnosis. Dr. Harmon, the doctor that hypnotized Jessica earlier, instructed on him what to say. And Joan planted the story with Mr. Michaels, knowing he would tell him, like I said before." So, Mrs. Fletcher says that Andy was not hypnotized just now, or at that minute, just like he wasn't hypnotized that night. He had earplugs in his ears. He had learned how to get away from the hypnotist's most powerful weapon, his voice. He had earplugs in his ears, and that's why he didn't hear Mrs. Fletcher calling him when he got on the elevator. And he also referred to the elevator as a lift, which is something that they, I guess, call an elevator in England. So, if the police do some digging, there'll be a connection between him and the hypnotist. But Andy decides to do a full confession. Basically, the lawsuit that was filed, named his father too, who owned the newspaper. His father was completely and utterly ruined, both financially and by reputation. He couldn't stand to start all over again, so his father killed himself. and Andy had always wanted to kill the hypnotist. Unfortunately, he just never knew exactly how to do it. It wasn't until this opportunity fell into his lap that he decided to kill him. He was pretending to be hypnotized with the others. He was never hypnotized. He stole a steak knife from the restaurant, and when the hypnotist least expected it, he put it in his back, and then pretended to be hypnotized with everyone else. Why he decided to break glass and alert everyone to it, I don't get that point, because the whole Sherry Diamond being the killer thing didn't seem to come till later, and I don't know if he knew that ahead of time. That's the one part that I don't get. So the detective thanks Mrs. Fletcher for helping solve the crime and asks if she would like to come to Las Vegas to help him to solve another crime. And she says as long as it doesn't involve a locked room. Then Joan comes bursting out of the front doors of the hotel and says to Mrs. Fletcher that her boss is ecstatic about the idea for the book. That is if Mrs. Fletcher wants to write it. Mrs. Fletcher says, sure, fine, why not, I'll give it a chance. But Joan then says that they like the ending better with Sherry as the killer, and they also want her to stretch the truth a little. And Mrs. Fletcher goes, oh dear. And that's the end of the episode. Whether she writes the book, I don't know. Overall, this episode did not have a lot of twists and turns, and the title is kind of strange. Death Cast a Spell. That would imply that the hypnotist was a warlock or something. So I would rename this episode Hypnosis and Murder. Possibly the only title that makes sense. We had some very noticeable guest stars in this episode, and they are as follows. Dana Kavanagh played the role of Joan. And she's still alive. Oh, she's known for, I knew she looked familiar. She's known for being on the TV sitcom Soap, which poked fun at soap operas as the daughter, Corinne. I knew she looked familiar, I just could not place her. She's also known for a television series that didn't last very long called Throb, The Love Boat, and One True Thing, a movie with Meryl Streep and Renee Zellweger, which was really good. She has not acted in anything since 2009. She's been in 42 different things. She's done a lot of voiceover work because she is one of those voices. And this is not her only episode on Murder, She Wrote. She will appear in a couple others. But she was on The Love Boat in a handful of episodes. Trapper MD, Hotel, Soap, like I said, Fantasy Island, Barney Miller. So she's had quite a career. She's really great. Okay. The hypnotist was played by Jose Farrell. I didn't really recognize him. He passed away in 1992 at the age of 80. He's known for Dune, the original Moulin Rouge from 1952, and the Caine Mutiny. He appeared in over 120 different things, and the last known credit is a TV movie from 1991 called The Perfect Tribute. He guest starred on Matlock, Sesame Street, Newhart, Magical World of Disney, The Love Boat, the miniseries George Washington as Governor Dean Whittle, and this is his only episode of Murder, She Wrote. He had quite the impressive career. May you rest in peace, sir. Next, like I said, Bud Michaels was played by Murray Hamilton. who passed away in 1986 at the age of 63. He is known for Jaws, The Graduate, Anatomy of a Murderer, and 1941. He was in 155 or 59 different things. His last known credit is 1986 Whoops Apocalypse. He guest starred on The Golden Girls as Blanche's dad, Big Daddy. This is his only episode of Murder, She Wrote. He also guest starred on Mama's Family, BJ and the Bear, The Magical World of Disney. He also appeared in Jaws 2, McCloud, McMullen and Wife, Love, American Style. He was in the cult classic The Way We Were, Night Gallery. He had such a great, impressive career and left a legacy behind. May he rest in peace. Okay, the lieutenant was played by Robert Hogan. He is known for... He's still alive, and he is known for Species 2, Batman the Original Series, and Advice from a Caterpillar. Okay. He's been in 154 different things, and he's still acting to this day. His last known credit is 2018's Maturity, a TV series I've never heard of. He guest starred on Law & Order SVU, the original Law & Order, The Wire, Law & Order Criminal Intent. He was on One Life to Live, and also All My Children. He was on the soap opera Another World, and this will not be his only episode of Murder, She Wrote. He will appear in a handful of others. He also guest starred on Magnum P.I., The Cobies, Knight Rider, Double Trouble, Hotel, Saint Elsewhere, Scarecrow and Mrs. King, Alice, Laverne and Shirley, Hill Street Blues, T.J. Hooker, Quincy M.E., and so many others. Really great career, Mr. Hogan. And he was a good detective. He wasn't an annoying detective like most of the detectives you see on Murder, She Wrote. Conrad Jarvis played Dr. Yamberg, who hypnotized Jessica. He is still alive. He is known for The Cable Guy with Jim Carrey, Airport 1975, Bad Blood, and Brewster's Millions. He's still acting to this day, but his last known credit is 2012's Bad Blood. He guest starred on Frasier, Family Law, Addams Family Reunion, Diagnosis Murder, Baywatch. This will not be his only episode of Murder, She Wrote. He also guest starred on The Golden Girls. In that episode where they're in the dance marathon, he played the announcer. Highway to Heaven. And he was Mindy's father on Mork and Mindy, and also lent his voice to the cartoon series Mork and Mindy, Laverne and Shirley, and Fonzie Hour. So he was a staple on television around that time, so it's nice to see him in something. And he's a funny guy, and he has a great funny voice, so it's nice to see him in that. Elaine Joyce played the role of Sherry Diamond. She is known for... She's still alive. She is known for Motel Hell, Trick or Treat, the original Beverly Hills 90210, and The Love Boat. She has been in 62 different things. Her last known credit is Beverly Hills 90210 as Candace. And I don't know, because I don't think I've seen those episodes. She was on The Young and the Restless at one point, Days of Our Lives. This will not be her only episode of Murder, She Wrote. She'll appear in a couple others. She guest starred also on Simon and Simon, Fantasy Island, Love Boat, Hotel, Heart to Heart, Magnum P.I. So she was on all the mystery shows The Incredible Hulk. She had quite an impressive career. Ooh, and Charlie's Angels as well. So she had quite an impressive career. She was really good as Sherry Diamond. Can't wait to see what other characters she's played. Andy was our murderer. Andy was played by Brian Kerwin. He is still alive, and he is known for Jack, with Robin Williams, 27 Dresses, Torch Song Trilogy, and One Life to Live. He's been in 94 different things. His last known credit is 2019's Madam Secretary. Like I said, he was on One Life to Live. He guest starred on The Client List, Elementary, Blue Bloods, Desperate Housewives, Without a Trace, Nick Tuck, Grey's Anatomy. Oh, that's why he looked familiar. Medium, Boston Legal, The West Wing, Law and Order Special Victims Unit, Strong Medicine, love that show. The Original Law and Order, Frasier, The Wonderful World of Disney. Roseanne. He was on Roseanne as Gary Hall, Tales from the Crypt, Deadly Nightmares, Saint Elsewhere. This is his only episode of Murder, She Wrote, and he also guest starred on Highway to Heaven, Simon to Simon. So interesting, he's had a long and prosperous career. He was good as the murderer, what can I say? Mr. Kagan, Joe, was played by Robert Lonigan. I don't know if I said that right, I'm sorry. He unfortunately passed away in 2015 at the age of 85. That's where I recognized him from. Oh, it's been killing me. Big. He played in the movie Big with Tom Hanks, where they both are on that piano and they play that song. And he also was in Independence Day. Oh, it was killing me, you guys. I kept thinking, I know this guy, I've seen this guy, but I have like no idea who he is. So I'm so happy I know now. Lost Highway and Scarface. He was in 233 different things and acted up way past his death in 2015. His last known credit is in The Servant. He did some voiceover work for Family Guy. He was on the TV series Men of a Certain Age, Hawaii, the remake of Hawaii Five-0, The Sopranos, Malcolm in the Middle. He did some voice work for the video game Grand Theft Auto 3. He guest starred on Touched by an Angel, Dorma and Gray, The Outer Limits, Frasier. Magnum P.I., Alfred Hitchcock Presents, and this is his only episode of Murder, She Wrote, unfortunately. Oh, he also guest starred on Little House on the Prairie, but I haven't got to that episode yet. Alright, he had a long career, and I loved him in Big and in Independence Day. I just could not figure out why I recognized him so much. Zach Bernard was played by May F. Nutter. This is a weird name. He is known for The Stone Boy, Hitler's Blood, The Waltons, and Knots Landing. He was in 37 different things. He was on Days of Our Lives, Knots Landing as Peter Winslow. I wish that they would syndicate that show somewhere. This is his only episode of Murder, She Wrote. He also guest starred on Falcon Crest, Dukes of Hazzard, Magical World of Disney, and Charlie's Angels. And on The Waltons, he played Bobby Bigelow. Okay. He had a long career. and he's still alive. Regina, Joe's wife, was played by Michelle Phillips. She's still alive. She's also known for Knots Landing, as well as Dillinger and Cargo. Apparently, she sung a song on the soundtrack of that. She's been in 85 different things. Her last known credit is Betrayal from 2009. She guest starred on Seventh Heaven, Rude Awakening, Diagnosis Murder, Beverly Hills 90210 as Abby Malone, Love Boat The Next Wave, Knots Landing, like I said, she was on there, Lois and Clark, The New Adventures of Superman, Star Trek The Next Generation, Alfred Hitchcock Presents. She also was on Hotel as well, Santa Barbara, and this is her only episode of Murder, She Wrote. And The Love Boat, she was on a lot of things. Good for her. Alright, and that's it. That is all the guest stars. Overall, you guys, this episode it didn't have a lot of twists and turns, but I thoroughly enjoyed it. And I hope you did too. Thanks so much for listening and supporting me. I hope everyone has a wonderful Thanksgiving and everyone had a happy Halloween and everyone's being safe and wearing their masks. And I will see you guys in the next one. Happy crime solving!